Hello and welcome back to MR Realities, which is a audio podcast that my good friend Kevin Gray up in Tokyo and me, Dave McCaughan, sitting here in Bangkok, put together, where we talk to people involved in the market research industry from around the world about the things they're doing that are interesting, the work that they're developing, and also some of the sideline issues that they get involved in. And that's very much what we're going to talk about today, isn't it, Kevin?
Well, yeah, today is a departure to some extent from what we normally do. Alastair Gordon, who spent many years with AC Nielsen and who will be familiar to, I think, most anybody who's worked in marketing research for any period of time, had a very interesting career, and he's going to be telling us about a couple years of it and what he learned and any lessons that he might share with us. So Alastair, thanks so much for coming today.
Hey, look, thanks very much, Kevin and Dave. Thanks very much for having me. It's a great honor. I've been following your podcast for a while, so yeah.
Well, we're honored that you are. Wow.
Yeah.
No, we're shocked. But anyway,
yes.
All right, guys.
Shocked and awed. Anyway, you've had a long and illustrious career, and would you like to just brief us a little bit and tell us about who you are and not everybody?
Long. I'm old, as you're implying there, Kevin. I guess I get called a veteran these days. I've worked in marketing and market research for a very long time. As you said, with the Nielsen Corporation and its predecessors before that in Asia, kind of in country management roles mostly, in Philippines, Malaysia and Taiwan. And latterly, and in that sort of area, I, as you say, helped run organizations in some countries. And then I came out of that and I was working, I think, as you know, in new product development and at a global level with client servicing with major clients and areas like that in the corporate world, servicing, some of the bigger clients in the world. And then myself and David McCaughan, who will be very familiar to many people on this call, set up a consultancy, basically supporting market research and smaller agencies with business issues, improving their business processes, mentoring business and service development, and helping with research, particularly in the area of some of the neuroscience applications. And we were doing that for about much of the last decade. And then I think both of us got just a little bit bored after you've been doing research for 30 or 40 years and, dealing with the sort of lots of marketing issues and big corporations. You get you've done quite a few things the same way for some time and you're looking for something new. And I think the thing that you were talking about to me today is I took a bit of a jump. I'd done a very major research project working with a big international client, helping them develop training material for use around the world. And it was a fascinating sort of project, but I ended up thinking, I am bored. I've done so much of this sort of stuff for so long. I want to do something new. I want an adventure. And I ended up joining a volunteer organization to go to East Timor, to Timor-Leste, to support the development of small businesses there in various ways, which we can talk about later. So that was a big jump in my career, and I spent 2 years there, 2015 to 2000, end of 2017, and it was a very major thing for me and quite a change from the corporate world.
Well, I would imagine it would be. So it was partly you just wanted a change, a big. And this is a major change, moving away, not to the other side of the planet, but to a very different environment from Wellington, Virginia, and the other New Zealand, and the various places. Definitely from Wellington, Virginia, if there is a place. But
I don't know about Wellington, Virginia, but Wellington, New Zealand is pretty different from Timor-Leste.
Yeah. And so to make a shift like that, you had to give it quite a lot of thought and so forth. So I imagine this is not really impulsive. You wanted to make a change. And how did you come across the organization you wound up working for?
Yeah, well, New Zealand, like many countries, has a volunteering organisation called Volunteer Service Abroad. And my wife put me onto the website, and I'd thought they were an organisation that sort of basically had nurses and teachers and so on and sent them abroad. But what they do is they work very closely with partner organisations in developing countries to identify needs, and then they write a job description and look for people that fit that job description. So they had a whole bunch of job descriptions, and a lot of them were using, some of them were using skills that, I thought I had in terms of marketing. And I thought, well, and I could bring my wife along, and they paid your expenses, nothing else, no great salary. So it was a big drop in income, but they paid your expenses and arranged accommodation. Again, pretty basic accommodation compared to our house in New Zealand, but they provided those things, and you went and you got to help support economic development, as it were, in a developing country. And Timor-Leste, for people that don't know it, is one of the smallest, poorest and newest countries in the world. It's basically only been independent since 2000, and those people that may know a little bit of the history is they had an enormously rugged history. So in terms of Indonesian occupation, there's an enormous amount of violence as they moved towards independence after an independence referendum there. So it's a very new country. It's got a very, very troubled history. I had been thinking for a while that, I, like many of us, have benefited from working in developing countries over the years, and it felt to me like I really should give something back, in some way. And so that was a big motivation. But also my wife and I thought, let's do something different in a completely different place. Before we get too old to be able to cope with that kind of thing. Yeah.
By the time you had gotten there, had things politically settled down somewhat, or was there still some risk?
It is still a new and developing country. And, when in 2000, when the Indonesians withdrew, there was massive troubles. And literally, if you can imagine a country where around 80% of the buildings are destroyed.
Ooh.
Literally buildings from houses and everything on, they had come an awful long way in a short time. There's a certain amount of oil money because there is oil and gas in Timor-Leste, but they'd come but there was really some major development problems, and they were much more stable. They'd had a couple of elections, and people in Timor-Leste take their elections very seriously. They're very proud of being a democracy. So there was a lot to do, and it was a lot more stable and safer than it had been. But so it's a very safe, very nice country by and large. But it wasn't, I say, stable yet. There's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, stable. That doesn't even apply to the U.S. anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so did you encounter some strange looks? Like, who is this guy? This gentleman who looks a little bit different from us and doesn't speak our language. And
well, no, because there's quite a number of this. The aid industry. There's a lot of aid and development workers that have come into Timor-Leste, supported a lot by the UN. For a couple of years after independence, the UN was in there very strongly, and it's probably one of the United Nations success stories in terms of getting in and doing things. So no, they're used to Europeans and others coming in, but the language is an issue, certainly, and you have to learn a few words or you're stuck. The local language is called Tetun, but it was an opportunity for me to actually use my skills. So I didn't want to just sort of volunteer in some area I didn't know anything about, building houses or something. I was much keener on, using something where marketing and other skills could be helpful.
So tell us a bit about that. As you said, you've spent a lot of time in different parts of Asia and around the world, and in developing and not so developed countries and stuff. And we always have to shift. Whenever we go in as a project in our traditional work life, we've always had to sort of shift, I guess, the way you have to explain things and the levels of stuff to suit the market. How did you have to adjust into?
Well, the first thing is, not only when you're talking about a place like Timor-Leste, not only has the infrastructure gone, but a lot of the people have had enormously disrupted educations. So even if perhaps a person has gone on to do a degree in Indonesia or somewhere, they may well have lost a couple of years of their education somewhere. And so there's a lot of knowledge. I mean, the number of people who knows anything about marketing or research or business generally, or even organizational matters, that kind of middle class is just regrowing, is how I would put it. And so the skill level, well, to give an example, my career goes back to the days of sort of when Vietnam was just opening up, and I used to go and do training sessions in Vietnam on marketing and so on. I took some of those materials to Timor-Leste that I'd used back in the late 90s, thinking they'd be applicable. I had to sort of rewrite all of those and bring them down a level. So you really did have to adjust to getting things really at the basic level. And, and one of the things about it being a business volunteer as opposed to a health volunteer is that you're operating at a number of levels, really quite with some very basic organizations and people whose level of expertise is extremely low. And at the other level, you're helping out with policy development almost at a ministerial level as well. So you're really juggling your mind around a lot of different, parts of development processes and things. Yeah. No, I could imagine. I find it really interesting when I go to those sorts of places and do projects. But when you're there for over a long period of time, how did you find having, as it goes on, I can imagine the first couple of months you're learning as much as trying to help people, right? So, and then you get through a period where you start to get used to the way things are working and the level that, people are going to be working at and stuff. And so when did that sort of come for you, when you started to realize that you're starting to feel a bit more comfortable about the way to help, teach, share? Well, my job there was to sort of build capacity. It wasn't sort of to do things. I was trying to, help people think about how they could, I was working for a business support organization who was helping small and medium enterprises, helping with things like business incubation. And we can talk about why that was so important in that place later on if you want. But, I was sort of helping them build those sort of things. But the first thing that more than, if you go into a new country and you are an expert or a boss of the country, you've got a lot of authority immediately. And, you may be, people know your background and you're understood. You have to spend a lot of time building trust and building relationships. These societies are very relationship based. And so you have to build relationships and trust and do a lot of observation to see how things really work, how the people are really work. And that takes maybe 3 months, for me to sort of really understand how things operate and who the real operators are and how you do things. What was really enormous, and one of the things I noticed, and I think that people, Dave, Kevin, people like ourselves who've worked as consultants and worked in service industries, an advantage we have is we're kind of got some of those soft skills, like, sort of you're used to selling ideas in or negotiating with people. You're used to not being able to force the ideas on down people's throats. And so you bring in a lot of those skills that you've developed over years about how you get buy-in in organizations. and you have to apply those. It's a different sorts of organisations you're applying them to, but those skills turn out to be very useful in helping in that sort of place.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure that's the case. I'm just wondering, so when you go in there, what was like the first sort of thing project that you sort of got involved in? What?
Well, oddly enough, and then this is part about developing trust and showing that I'm useful, they had an enormously rundown office, and we were trying to show businesses and other places how to be more professional in Timor-Leste, but they would go in and not find the toilet working and so on. And you're trying to teach skills around project management and things like that. So I helped them. The first thing I got involved was helping them project manage an office renovation and how you got the funds for it and how you developed that and the skills behind that, which wasn't something I really knew or intended to do. But that sort of helped them feel that I was useful, I think. And then I got onto all sorts of things, things like building templates for marketing services. So training people on how you do needs assessments in businesses to work out what they're really, what they need to know to focus on. Should they be looking at their product development, or should they be looking at, marketing their products better, and building templates that would work across a range of businesses, because you're talking about everything from tiny horticultural businesses trying to sell dried figs through to fairly reasonable sized metal fabricators and things. So trying to develop templates for how you assess and look at businesses and things like that, and then basic things to how to assess people's marketing needs and what to give them and things like that. So it's developing services. I ended up working on a number of things at parallel, helping them think about how they structured their business, through to new business incubation services for small businesses out in the districts and things like that. And I ended up, and this is perhaps relevant, helping them set up a kind of little mini market research institute within it, because there was no capability for knowing anything about research, and there was quite a lot of need to understand how people in the country were using products and services, quite apart from anything from aid agencies or anything, wanting to know about people's nutrition and things like that. So I ended up helping them develop that, as well as a number of other things. Yeah.
So were you working a lot individually or in groups, or did that depend on the project?
Yeah, I worked a lot with the marketing team. There was also a training team, and I did, helped them work out how to get more clients for their training services. So mostly in groups, but also, I mentored directly a couple of individuals, and that's a lot of fun. They're really, really good people. You get an awful lot of appreciation from your time and being in person, because they realize you're not just doing it for the money. And they sort of appreciate it once you get to know those people. They've enormous number of people there have had lives so hard that most of us can't imagine it. They've seen members of families killed or whatever else, and you hear stories that are very, very strange and horrific. So you get very close to these people, yeah?
I can imagine, and again, nowhere near the experience you've had, but when I've gone in and done a little bit of work in maybe places not even as bad as Timor-Leste has gone through, but what does that mean in terms of the way these people have had, a lot of these people have had a lot of tragedy, a lot of obviously very, very, tough lives because of the different things that have happened there. How does that shift in terms of their attitude to the future and what they think about, how to look forward to the future, or how to make the future work?
Well, I tell you, and it's sort of skipping ahead to what I got out of it, but I mean, it's...
Yeah, please, go ahead.
One of the things that is remarkable about such a place. You know, you come from a developed country, or even, even mid-level developing countries that I've worked in quite a lot. And, you know, a lot of people are grouching or worried, and, you know, there's complaining about their rubbish collection or whatever. And you sit in a place with that, and you're amazed by the optimism and enthusiasm of people. And, you know, often even their entrepreneurial spirit under incredibly difficult circumstances. People, I won't say they're reconciled to sort of some of the things that have happened to them, but they've got their own ways of coping. You know, people are very often, when they do talk about things, they're very, very straightforward about it. You know, within 2 days of being, you know, in Timor-Leste, I was walking around with one of my counterparts, and we walked past a burnt building in a remote area, and she pointed at it and said, oh, 20 youths were killed in there a few years ago, whereas the Indonesian troops left. And I went, oh yeah, they burnt them alive, she said. And we walked a little bit further, and she said, oh, my husband's brother was one of them. And it was just a matter of fact thing. And you keep getting that sort of thing with people. So there's an underlying thing, but then their forgiveness is quite remarkable. They will say you know, oh, well, it was politics. It was the Indonesian military. I love the Indonesian people. They've got enormous forgiveness, which is very hard, a very strong sense of community. And they're, you know, they see their country as having a lot of troubles and a lot of things to do in development, but at a personal level, they're a lot more optimistic and resilient than most of us are. I think, you know, so that's a learning that you get out of it yourself. It does help you sort of look at your own life and what things are going on and take a different perspective on things. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess in recent years, you know, we keep on coming across this term, you know, first world problems, and I guess it really puts everything in perspective about that, right? So, yeah. The problems that you and I might think we have, you know, sort of get minimised pretty quickly, don't they? So that's really interesting.
And, you know, one of the things sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I mean, one of the things you get is because you go into a circumstance like that, you've perhaps lived as I have in a reasonable corporate environment, and, you know, flying on a few planes at business premium and stuff, and it's suddenly you're doing something quite different, and it helps you simplify your life. You see you don't need a lot of things, and that's one of the things that happened to my wife and I when we came back home. We downsized our house and got rid of a whole lot of stuff. So it has an effect on your thinking. Yeah.
Can you generalize about the views that people, from looking outside, from inside out, how the people you dealt with there, how they saw the West or the rest of Asia, Africa, whatever is, what kind of conception, if you can generalize, did they have about other parts of the world?
Oh, well, so if you think, so Timor-Leste, just, you know, as background, it was a Portuguese colony for 500 years. It's sort of half the island of Timor. It was sort of one of Portugal's residual colonies. So they had that sort of, there is a definite Portuguese influence. About 15% of the population still speaks some Portuguese, and it's still, fortunately or unfortunately, used in lots of official documents and things, even though not everybody reads it. They've had some exposure, especially in the middle class, quite a bit of exposure to the world. They, you know, then the Indonesians came and had, you know, 30 years of Indonesians bringing in ideas and things. So they're not, you know, they are, and especially in the remote rural areas, still quite a tribal, if you like, based society or community-based societies. But there's enough people, there's enough of a middle class for them to have a sort of a feeling for things. But I think if they were aspiring to be anywhere, it would be, you know, it would be the developed parts of Indonesia or Malaysia or Singapore that they see as, you know, where they would like to be. Aspirationally, they'd like to be out of Asia. But there's a lot of, say, Pacific Island influences in the culture and things like that. Some of the language has words that are the same as New Zealand's Maori, and so on. So there's a lot of links. It's a very culturally diverse and interesting place in that respect.
Yeah, so that in general, I guess then it would be hard to generalize about like marketing, the concept. Did you have difficulty in many cases conveying your concept or the general concept I think Westerners have or developed countries have of marketing to?
No, I mean, in a sense, once I worked out that what I was doing was a little bit like, the first people from Unilever that went into Indonesia to a certain extent, and I wasn't trying to get across big theories, but I was, in a sense, the difficulty was that in some levels you were helping people think about, strategic level things about how you developed business generally across the society and some of the policies and things that had to be put on the place. So there's some quite big picture things. But at a day-to-day level with some of the clients, you were really doing things like making sure that people made their banners so that the words could be read from a distance and had colors that could
Very 101.
stood out.
Right.
And it was a very big range of things, from trying to teach people a bit about marketing theory and the process of how you do it in a way that could make sense to them and be useful in their society. But but also doing some other things about helping see what the big picture planning and business incubation ideas were that were needed to get across as well. Yeah.
So if you were going to give us like the two or three things, like you just mentioned the example of like making signage big enough so people can read and stuff like that, right? Yeah. This sounds insanely obvious to three old guys sitting on a podcast like this, but given our experience, but what would like be two or three of those sorts of lessons that even surprised you, or that you had to sort of, I don't know, I don't want to use the term dumb down, but that's the only term I can think of, down to a level where it was like, okay, this is the way the marketplace needs to understand it, not the way I would normally have done it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it was just very general things like you have signage that shows where your business is. I did some work on really basic pricing with a couple of businessmen that had essentially been driven out during the time of troubles and came back and were re-establishing and really had kind of almost forgotten everything they'd known and were restarting from the bottom up about how you price things and make a profit. So the concept of making a profit is something that in some cases needs to be taught, right. And how you work that within the context in some places of traditional society where, if you make a profit, it goes off to someone else for a loan that may never come back. So how you build a business where you take into account both your traditional obligations, the need to get money for a bride price for your daughter, at the same time as you are doing a conventional business, if you like, a garage or a workshop, and you need to make a profit on it. And helping people balance those things. So it's things we don't think about quite often, but a lot of things were terribly normal, One of the things I'm quite, thinking of market research and some of the things that we got into, I think I did the first ever taste test in Timor-Leste for soybean milk. And that was driven simply because they had a lot of beans and a lot of the growing it, but no one really knew whether people would accept the taste if that was turned into milk. So should the aid agencies that were involved bother bringing in machines to process it? So they were going to invest a lot of money in that kind of thing, but really, would people drink it? And those were among the funnest taste tests I've ever did in my life, because if you imagine doing such a thing in a poor place, we're inundated by thousands of kids wanting free samples.
Yeah, I was just going to say. But the taste test actually becomes entertainment on its own, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely, and a lot of things that we're doing entertainment. It is a completely different business culture, and you experience every day something completely different. Yeah, both in the organisation and the things that you have to do. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. How about yeah, well, a taste test, I guess, covers this, but from the market research industry that you work in for so long, I was going to ask, what's an example of something that you found useful, or a technique or whatever that you ended up passing on? I guess obviously, I should ask first of all, what was the success of the taste test?
Oh, it was very good, yes, and that was an enormously useful launch among a couple of cooperatives of rural women, because not only did it give money for something that was just lying around a bit and being used in rice and beans, but it also gave a more nutritious sort of drink that they could sell outside schools. Because outside schools, they, as you know, in many bits of Asia, people sell fizzy drinks and things like that. Instead, nutrition is a big issue in the rural parts of Timor-Leste, so they could start selling these drinks, make some money for themselves, and give the kids some nutrition. So that was quite a cool one. But we ended up doing everything. I think we worked on things like the market potential, so a lot of desk research for aquaculture and different varieties of fish, so taste acceptability and how people would market and use those, and what the best way to do that. The thing I was proudest of, and the thing that I hope to continue to work on, was we did a huge study on the attitudes of farmers, and we're talking people with 1 hectare farms. Because there was a feeling among some of the ad agencies that there were great cultural barriers to these people becoming more entrepreneurial.
Right.
And in fact, we've said that there wasn't really big cultural barriers. We found that they really just wanted to, they didn't think that farming was very good for their kids. They enjoyed it, but they didn't think it was a career for their kids. And therefore they were sending their kids into Dili where there are no jobs.
Yeah.
And there's a huge policy implication for that, on how you market farming as a career, and why you should invest in it, and why you should take a few risks with it, and things like that. So, which is a sort of universal thing in many countries now, right? It is, yeah. But it's particularly important in a place like that, yeah. And I think that's where markets, the sort of area where sort of marketing and research skills can add a lot, because it takes the emphasis on from trying to sort of say these people are, so traditional, they'll never get into good farming techniques, to understanding why they do certain things and seeing ways that you can begin to build policies to get them out of it. And so that was one of the bigger things that I did. I really, worked on a big project on that area.
Yeah, I just have one final big question really for you, Alastair, and that was that is looking at the big picture. What kind of again? There's been lots and lots of talk about social responsibility and these big billionaires and massive corporations doing good things. Are there any lessons based on your experience you think would be applicable? Something if you were to be invited to speak in a boardroom of one of these big multinationals, that you would want to tell them?
Yeah, look, I'd say to them, look, rather than just looking at, social responsibility as some sort of donation or greeny sort of virtue signaling that we do, you have within some of the corporations, like some of the corporations that you and I have worked with, Kevin, the Procters and Gambles, the Unilevers and so on, they have already got a huge amount of knowledge among their people about these societies at a real grassroots level. They know how little warangs work, they know how people think, they know about their motivations, and I think there's many more ways that they could creatively think about how they invested some of the time of their people. After all, people are often being, we all know people have been made redundant by corporations. We all know people that, who are coming up to retirement from these corporations, who are wondering what to do. I think some of those boardrooms and corporations could think about volunteering as something they could do where they're making use of their people. They may not have to always lay them off. They can help support a volunteer in the field somewhere to get in and do in-depth work. And they can encourage people on retirement and perhaps support them to go and do something with their skills. Because the wonderful thing that I had was, I was using skills I hadn't used for 30 years and having an enormous time, doing briefing and helping people work out how to write questionnaires and, doing this stuff. It's a real joy, and you get amazing feedback from it. And I think the second thing I'd tell them about the young people is, all the young people I met who were volunteers just had so much personal and skills growth in the various things they were doing. So, in the sense that you, as a young person who's doing the kind of volunteering I was doing, you get to work at levels you'd never get to work in a developed society. You work with ministers and senior people, and you deal with crises, and they grow enormously. So I think one thing I'd tell them is, if you see someone at a younger or mid-level with, good, proper, I don't mean volunteerism where you just go out and build a house, but doing a proper volunteer assignment that meets a need in a developed society. If you see someone with that on their CV, value that more than an MBA, because they have done so much and grown so much at a personal level out of it. I think that's really important. So
I really think you've hit on something, a couple of things that they could be doing. There's a talk, but let's do something. And it's not that they cannot afford to do this, even in a small way. I think things. The example would have over time, particularly when you have so many of these big companies who are not doing this, it could have a tremendous impact.
Yeah. I think partnering with their relevant organizations in their own countries has the virtue signaling, but it really does some good. And it also uses, and as I'm saying, leverages some of those things that they already know as organizations about a lot of these places and a lot about the people. I mean, I think Unilever knows more about the people and the grassroots of many developing countries than most of the people in the aid sector, to be honest, in terms of having a feeling for how these people operate and what their culture is like and so on. Yeah. So I think they should use that more. And the same with the ad agencies, Dave. I think there's a lot of knowledge tied up in there that could be deployed really usefully.
No, I agree with you. I agree. I know since like you, I left the corporate world, and I do a lot of projects, teaching seminars and stuff in some interesting countries like Bangladesh. And, I think there's a lot of work that big corporations, as you say, I think your two examples are great. As you both know, one of my big interests is the aging world. And one of the biggest issues for me is the fact that companies are not using or thinking about how they're going to use those people that are over 60 or 65 or whatever, 70, that still want to do stuff. And I think you're a great example of the fact that, you can have a great long career, and then you get to a certain point in life and you're still pretty, obviously very, very active, still want to get out there and do stuff and learn new things. And I think it's really interesting the way you're obviously so super enthusiastic about this.
I am. And I'd just say to anyone listening, put your ego aside and give it a go. It's sort of interesting, because you can't help but think, we've crossed paths over the years and stuff, but you just can't imagine, like, if we'd had this, if we'd been doing a podcast with you 10 years ago when you're still working in the big corporate world, would you have had that same enthusiasm in your voice? Probably, maybe, but because it's you, but you sound super enthusitic about this, and that's really, I think it would be a slightly more professional enthusiasm, Dave. I mean, I enjoy the neuroscience and all the other things, but it's helping.
There's always a difference. There's always a difference between being, highly professional and competent, and then just damn enthusiastic. You know,
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm picking up. So, you know.
Dave, did you have a special question or anything else you would like to?
Yeah, well, you know,
ask,
Gordon, if you followed any of our podcasts, you know, I always ask all our guests the same question at the end. I'm not too sure how you're going to answer this, but the question is, you know, given all your experiences and all the things you've done, is there the sort of one question that you haven't asked that you wish you'd asked?
You mean that I wish you'd asked?
No, that you had wished you had asked. The one question you never asked that you wish you had asked.
No, I'm not sure how I'm going to answer that, Dave.
I was just thinking as we were going through this about, oh, this is a bit different because normally it's in the context of, you know, if you think back to when you were, you know, working with Unilever or whatever, it'd be like, well, I wish I'd done in a certain study, I wish we'd asked this question because it's so obvious.
Okay, yeah. No,
right?
I see where you're coming from. No, I think I wish I'd had more time to do things, and I wish, you know, I wish I'd known what I'd known at the end of 2 years in Timor-Leste at the beginning, because I could have got much more productive much faster.
Right.
And, you know, and so there's a lot of learning, and I wish I'd realized a little bit more, so much not about a question asked, but of the need to very quietly observe before you try and force yourself upon people. I think that was a cultural lesson that many people have. Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Listen, thanks very much for the time. The chat's been great. We're going to spread this around widely and hope a lot of people listen to it. And then I've just, while we've been talking, I actually looked up the government site or the site in Australia for Australian volunteers. And I think what we'll do is we might post the New Zealand and Australian links. At least I will be when we lift up the thing.
There's a Jap for Kevin's watches. There's a very good Japanese volunteering organisation, JACO. What that stands for. The same in Korea. So, you know, there is opportunities in many places. Yeah.
That's fantastic. We'll try to push that one along. Thanks for your time, mate. It's been great.
My pleasure. Yeah. And if any of you, you know, have an opportunity, just put the ego aside and give it a go, is what I say to anyone out there.
Okay.
Well, I'll give that some thought. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, guys. Look, thanks very much for having me. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. This has been great. Thank you.
Thanks, Gordon.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.